Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The United States and South Korea have begun their annual joint military exercises, but tensions with North Korea are already rising. After issuing a sharp warning through Kim Yo-jong, Pyongyang followed up with another signal as leader Kim Jong-un personally observed the test launch of a strategic cruise missile that appeared to strike an actual target. The move is drawing attention as a possible show of force timed with the joint drills. At the same time, broader security factors are also in play, from Washington's global military commitments to shifting diplomatic signals into the region. So what message is North Korea trying to send, and what could come next on the Korean Peninsula? For answers to this, we are joined here in the studio by Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. A big welcome, Dr. Go.
It's very nice to be here.
And also joining us online is Joel Atkinson, Professor of Graduate School of International and Area Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you, Professor.
Yes, hello. It's nice to be with you.
So let's first just start a discussion with North Korea's response to the drills, Dr. Go. After Kim Yo-jong's criticism, Kim Jong-un observed the launch of the Hwasal cruise missile, which appears to have struck a real target. How serious would you read into this situation, and what kind of message do you think North Korea is sending?
Well, it's not an increase in the threat level by an order of magnitude. Not at all. It's just another tactical weapons development by North Korea. We have known North Korea having developed this cruise missile capability for a while. What's interesting here is that first of all, it was launched from a new missile-guided destroyer, Chaehyun. And so this is a capability that North Korea didn't have before. But in terms of a tactical threat, I wouldn't say it's very high, because it's really to track a big vessel like a missile destroyer like Chaehyun. So launching a cruise missile from a vessel like that, it doesn't really carry an element of surprise. Whereas when it comes to the strategic messaging that North Korea might have intended with this test, it's very clear. This missile, Hwasal cruise missile, is nuclear capable. So clearly, North Korea is trying to send another message that any kind of escalation in the Korean Peninsula, any kind of contingency in the Korean Peninsula, might easily escalate into a nuclear exchange. So this is also another moment for North Korea to showcase its nuclear capability.
Right, so another way of really showcasing its nuclear force. Now, when we go back a little bit to the joint military drills itself, around 18,000 troops are taking part, similar to last year, but field exercises have been cut to 22, which is less than half of last year's level. Professor Atkinson, why do you think was the scale reduced? And also, where does the wartime OPCON transfer process stand right now?
Yeah, well, at least according to what has been reported, the reason is that the Korean government, the Lee Jae-myung administration, wanted to reduce the scale of the exercise as part of that ongoing attempt to kind of induce North Korea, encourage North Korea into a dialogue, a productive, cooperative dialogue. For a long time, North Korea has criticized these big joint U.S.-Korea exercises as war preparations, as preparation for an invasion. So presumably, the Lee administration believes that if it reduces the size of this round of Freedom Shield exercises, if more of the exercise is done through simulations rather than troops in the field, if training is spread out across more smaller exercises rather than a few really big ones, Pyongyang will take that as a concession and thus warm up to Seoul, that it will agree to start talking. Apparently the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise last August was also reduced in size, perhaps at least in part for that same reason. Again, according to the reports, the American side pushed back a little bit on this. Ostensibly, it was because they had already committed the forces and resources to doing the exercise. The real reason is probably because it reduces readiness and signals a lack of resolve. But I'm guessing probably Washington didn't push too hard, as there are those in the Trump administration who are happy to see less money spent on U.S. forces Korea or focused on North Korea as opposed to other priorities such as China or the Western Hemisphere, or indeed, the action in Iran. And there are those who, like the Lee administration, want to encourage Kim Jong-un back to negotiating with US President Trump, probably including Trump himself. So you mentioned the transfer of wartime operational control. The Lee administration is very, I think, confidently asserting that everything is on track. These exercises are part of that, what they call the conditions-based process to gain wartime operational control. But clearly, Seoul believes it can reduce the scale of these exercises while still moving ahead with what's a very quick timeline, aiming to attain operational control in 2028, perhaps, before the end of Trump's term. It's difficult to know what the American side thinks about this, as the Trump administration is, not a fully coherent policy-making entity with consistent messaging and decision-making. And there's also Congress to consider. But I suspect behind closed doors, the two sides are probably not completely on the same page on this schedule.
So definitely there seems to be a lot of uncertainty. And another factor that's adding to it is the war in the Middle East, of course. There's even talk that some U.S. forces Korea equipment could be redeployed. So, Professor, if that actually happens, what could it mean for the security on the Korean Peninsula?
Yes, apparently the U.S. is in the process of moving some equipment out of its bases here and sending them to the Middle East. There is precedent for that. It happened on a much larger scale during the war in Iraq. And then in May last year, a U.S. forces Korea Patriot missile defense unit with about 500 personnel was moved to the Middle East ahead of that strike against Iran's nuclear facilities in June. This time it's reportedly Patriot launchers and offensive artillery and even THAAD interceptor missiles. That THAAD aspect has received most of the attention due to the anger and the economic punishment Korea received from China when the US introduced THAAD in 2016. Much of that attention is actually misplaced, as it was THAAD's radar that upset Beijing so much. And at least based on what's been reported so far, that radar remains, and it probably will remain, along with the launches and at least some of the missiles that they have left. So how could such a move affect the security on the Korean Peninsula? These are real capabilities, which is why the US wants them in the Middle East. But what those missile defense assets could stop, I would say, is only a small fraction of what North Korea can use to attack. And more importantly, US forces Korea is only one component of deterrence against North Korea. The bulk of deterrence comes from South Korean capabilities and from what the US can bring from outside of the peninsula. So this movement is not going to have a large impact on security in a material sense. So basically, President Lee is not really wrong when he says that it won't affect security, but it does relate to broader developments that will affect Korean security. That could be the US moving away from deterring North Korea as it focuses on other priorities. And it could also be increasing pressure on South Korea from China, as China increasingly focuses on American forces here as a kind of a deployable force that could play a role in the defense of Taiwan, for example. But in of themselves, these redeployments don't really give us, I think, any new information about where all of that is heading.
So it's kind of a relieving to hear that the redeployment of that is not really a big, going to give a big loophole to the current situation. But meanwhile, for South Korea, Dr. Go, reportedly South Korea provided Cheongung-2 interceptor missiles to the UAE. Do you think this could show some kind of strength of Korea's defense industry or raise concerns about our own defense readiness?
Well, first of all, it was a debut for the Cheongung system in actual battle. So it's been reported that Cheongung has been able to intercept more than 90% of the targets, so which is very good, obviously. But also showcases the strength of the South Korea's defense industry, because it provides an alternative source of a highly sophisticated anti-missile defense system that's actually available in the world, of which there are very few. So in that sense, I think I really probably asked to strengthen the deterrence aspect for allies and partners around the world, which sorely need this kind of anti-missile defense systems when they're essentially like running out right now. But having said that, I think there should be, I mean, I think the latter part of your question is very much on the mark, in the sense that selling a weapon system to an ally or partner, it's actually more than just selling on a product. It's not like selling a Hyundai car, for instance, to a customer. The defense system essentially carries a political meaning, as well as a guarantee that if there's any contingency that involves a customer, in this case a military customer, South Korea will have to stand by and abide, and also support the customer base for the duration of the contingency, and that could, in a worst-case scenario, involve South Korea in a contingency or military conflict that it doesn't want. So clearly, Iran is an example of such a scenario. So for now, I think the UAE, which actually uses this Cheonggung defense system, is using it for its own self-defense. But if it's been reported that UAE might in fact retaliate against Iran for its attacks, then South Korea might be asked by UAE to step up even more, which in that case could potentially entrap South Korea into an unwanted conflict with Iran. So, but this is a natural part of the defense contract. So something that I think South Korea's defense industry, as well as the South Korean government, should take into consideration in the future contracts and export agreements.
Mm-hmm. So it really carries a strategic political significance to it as well. Now, when we stay with the broader message coming out from Washington, President Trump said that when, quote, crazy people have nuclear weapons, bad things can happen. And the U.S. Defense Secretary said strong action on Iran would send a message to others. So, Professor Atkinson, do you think North Korea could also see that as a warning?
Well, you know, one major reason, perhaps the most important reason, that North Korea could get to the stage that it has with nuclear weapons is that because it had a very formidable, a very strong conventional non-nuclear deterrent, basically enough artillery to flatten Seoul. Iran had a conventional deterrent, that was Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, but those were all degraded after Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023. That greatly reduced the cost for Israel and the US to go after Iran's nuclear facilities, and indeed to even go after a government that would not meet their demands on nuclear weapons and try to replace them with a different government that would. And that's kind of what we're seeing. So North Korea is in a different league. It still has those formidable conventional capabilities, and it now also has nuclear weapons. It also has much stronger support from China. Unlike with Iran, the US must assume that China could intervene to defend North Korea like it did during the Korean War. So it's possible that Washington sees this as a message, negotiate away your nuclear weapons or else. But it'd be pretty dumb of them to think that it would work. But I would argue it does send a message to Pyongyang. It shows that Trump is willing to use force. He's willing to do things kind of outside the norm. So I would think Pyongyang may therefore be even more cautious about using pressure tactics, including low-level violence against Washington. They're going to be much more, they'll be a degree more cautious about that kind of approach.
Mm-hmm. So having heard that and the latest developments coming out from the world, Dr. Go, do you think Kim Jong-un would try to reopen dialogue with U.S. President Donald Trump within this year, or do you think he would be waiting for some kind of incentives from Washington?
Well, clearly, I think engaging in dialogue with Washington at this juncture is a double-edged sword for Kim Jong-un. I think one of the biggest challenges for Kim Jong-un is assurance or lack of thereof coming from Trump. So as Professor Atkinson described so well, this is an element of irrational, no, actually a perception that President Trump, if is opportunistic and sometimes engages in this kind of surprise actions that that goes beyond the norms of behavior by a superpower like the United States, such as engaging in decapitation operations against leaders of other countries. So, so I think this carries an element of risk for North Korea. So, for instance, if Kim Jong-un and Trump agreed to sit down in the same room, and if, to the surprise of the North Koreans, if President Trump puts on the table a demand for denuclearization, such a demand is going to carry more weight than before because unlike previous American presidents, President Trump might in fact react in a way that surprises North Korea in a bad way if such a demand is not accepted or considered carefully by Kim Jong-un. So I think that in fact introduces another element or burden for Kim Jong-un when it comes to engaging in dialogue with Trump because any kind of negotiation carries a potential or downside of punishment by the United States now. And I think even though the chance of such a punishment taking place is pretty low, given the fact that North Korea possesses a very high level of deterrence, including nuclear weapons, nonetheless, there's still such a little bit of a risk for North Korea. And North Koreans, despite our perception that North Koreans are very irrational, in fact, they are very rational and they are highly risk averse, especially when it comes to protection of their leader. So in that sense, I think the North Koreans will be even more cautious in engaging North Korea after what happened in Venezuela and as well as what's happening in Iran.
So unpredictability would lessen the chances. Now, meanwhile, we're also seeing active diplomacy on the ground. Senior U.S. State Department officials are visiting South Korea this week, including Assistant Secretary David Wiesel and Michael Desombre. Professor, what messages do these kinds of visits to Korea actually send, and what issues do you think would be on the table?
Yeah, so it does seem relevant that David Wiesel, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Northeast Asia, was in Seoul, I think, until today, and then Michael Desombre, the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, he arrived today for a 5-day visit. But at the same time, I think essentially it is their job to come for visits. I don't think it has to mean that there's something kind of extraordinary going on that they need to talk about. But, then again, having said that, what isn't extraordinary these days, there's certainly no shortage of things for them to discuss with their counterparts in Seoul. There's the issue of the trade and investment deal, implementing the deal signed last year. That could include all kinds of things, new issues like the value of the Korean won, the exchange rate. There's Iran and what the US side expects from Seoul in terms of messaging and support. There's that issue of encouraging North Korea to talk. And with some speculating Trump could even meet Kim Jong-un in Beijing when he visits at the end of the month. There's that issue of modernizing the alliance that relates to burden sharing, but also to what extent it should be oriented toward deterring China, not just North Korea. That recent US-China fighter jet encounter over the West Sea, that's really put that in the spotlight. There's much to discuss there. And then finally, there's this kind of entanglement, I guess you could call it, of South Korean and US domestic politics. I saw that Wiesel, he met with a prominent opposition figure, Lee Jun-suk, who's quite, pro-American. And, the US may even raise, concerns about the imprisonment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Who knows, something that's kind of coming through their MAGA network. So, yeah, I think we'll just really have to wait and see what information comes out about their discussions.
So we'll really have to see about the results. Now, finally, before we conclude our discussion tonight, Dr. Go, North Korea will hold its Supreme People's Assembly on the 15th. What signals should we watch for in that event?
Well, I think that the grand issues when it comes to the next 5 years of North Korea's regime's policy has been settled in the previous meetings of the Ninth Party Congress. I think some of the loose ends that's been left over from the previous meeting could be resolved, such as, it's actually our inquiries about what's the real position that Kim Yo-jong will be put in charge with, for instance, and as well as potential changes in the confirmation of the leadership changes in North Korea, whether this generational leadership change that we have witnessed in the past months is in fact a generational change or some sort of a signaling of a new emergence of a new political class. So I think it's going to be not very surprising, but nonetheless it's an important event for North Korea. So it bears watching.
So we will be watching for more signals on North Korea's direction over there. We'll have to conclude our discussion here tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Go.
My pleasure.
And of course, Professor Atkinson, too. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And nice to see you there, Dr. Go. Yeah.
Likewise, good to see you.
Okay.
And that will be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.